Okay, thank you everybody for joining us on this webinar. My name is Bricio Vasquez. I am the data scientist with the Intercultural Development Research Association, and I will be presenting today along with Katie Martin Lightfoot, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Martin Lightfoot and I am the Census Community Engagement Coordinator at Every Texan, formerly the Center for Public Policy Priorities, and I also get to coordinate the Texas Counts campaign.
Thank you, Katie. So I appreciate everybody being here today and listening in to how we can better get out the count in this last month that we have to get as many people counted as possible. As you may already know, or you may not know, the census has decided to suspend census operations on September 30th. Which is a month earlier than they had originally planned. So the timeline for the census has changed somewhat over the course of the year. And so that's one of the things that we're going to review today. The purpose of this meeting is mainly to give you a sense of how the census is unfolded, what has been happening here in Texas, and also to give you a sort of set of strategies to move forward and get involved and get as many people counted as possible in these last weeks that we have for the census. So that's what we're going to cover today. So we're going to give a brief timeline or history of the 2020 census, what has sort of unfolded over the course of the year. Then Katie will talk about Texas Counts, which is a statewide effort to get as many people counted as possible in the 2020 census. And then we're going to transition over to talk about how you can increase census efforts and census outreach specifically within your school. So we're imagining that the audience is and it was intended for this audience to be composed mainly of education professionals. So you may be a teacher or an administrator. You may be a parent or a student yourself, and you may want to know how you can ramp up or increase census activities in this last month that we have to get as many people counted. So that was the intent. That is the intent of the webinar, and that is what we hope to provide you with today. So just a brief timeline on the 2020 census. So let's set a little bit of context. If you think back as far as 2017, the census and really the White House and the Department of Commerce sort of started talking about including a citizenship question in the 2020 census, which has led to a considerable amount of confusion and also legal battles prior to the census. So you may remember in 2019, around this time in the summer, around June actually, this sort of concept of including a question that would ask respondents of their citizenship status was under review by the US Supreme Court. And generally speaking, the Supreme Court ruled that the addition of a citizenship question was generally unconstitutional and would not be allowed to be included in the 2020 census. However, over the course of the year and a half, 2 years, where there was considerable discussion and dialogue about this question, there was a sort of chilling effect, we believe, among people that this citizenship question would have affected, right? And so it created a lot of fear and a lot of sort of apprehension with regards to taking the 2020 census, right? There were discussions about how this question may be used to track where the people of different citizenship statuses may live, even though the Census Bureau cannot actually reveal to the public or even to other agencies specifics about where people live and specifics about the data in the census. Nevertheless, I think it also, it created some apprehension and fear regarding the possibility of people being tracked down. And so along with this fear, now we have sort of the advent of COVID-19, which not only delayed census operations, but it also sort of added to the confusion of what needed to be done in order to get a complete and accurate count. So in terms of the timeline, it looks kind of like this now, right? So in January 21st, the Census Bureau started counting people in remote Alaska. They were actually sending census enumerators to these hard to count places, hard to reach populations. And then sometime in the middle of March, the Census Bureau people started receiving the census forms online. So there's a major change or addition to how people are counted. So this is the first year that people are able to respond to the census via the internet. And so the census mail out, which would normally be a form they filled out physically and mailed back. Now the census mail out actually gave you a unique identifier, which you would then use to fill out the census online. This unique identifier identified your household and your address. But in addition to online responses, you could still respond through the paper form and mail it back, and you could also respond through the phone. So these forms, these announcements began to roll out and arrive at households around the middle of March. The census day, theoretically, the day that everybody is counted is April 1st. So it's a mid-year census. And because it's a cross-sectional count of everybody, it is actually, the cross-section in time is taken on April 1st. But that doesn't mean that census operations stop on April 1st. People are able to respond continuously through April. This is just the official day that the census is taken. So after the census day on April 1st, give me 1 second. Okay. The census takers were starting to take counts at colleges or what are called group orders, right? So this is a census actually going out to places where groups of people live, like dormitories, prisons, senior centers, other types of places where there are groups of people living, right, excluding apartment complexes. And the Census Bureau was actually counting people through in those places July 1st through September 3rd. So that is still going on today. And then all census operations, including in-person enumerations, when households do not reply to the census themselves, when they do not either fill out the census form online, over the phone, or mail it back, then the U.S. Census Bureau actually sends census enumerators in person to those households to get the count. So that will end on September 30th. Originally, according to the adjusted timeline after COVID, we were under the impression, and the Census Bureau announced that those operations would end on October 31st. But earlier this month, it was announced that instead they were going to roll it back to September 30th. So we actually lost about a month and what could have been a critical time to count as many people as possible. After the counts are gathered, the Census Bureau actually conducts a number of different checks and unduplicates anybody that has responded maybe more than once to the census. They engage in some data preparation, data cleaning that does take some time in order to deliver the counts to the president by December. And so what the situation that we're in is that we initially thought we had an additional month, which according to Census Bureau officials, that would have been enough time for us to get an accurate, complete count. Now, the U.S. Department of Commerce is arguing that no, in fact, that there would be no difference if we extended it to October 31st, and operations then must cease on September 30th. So part of what this webinar is intended to do, again, is to see how we can ramp up efforts to get as many people counted as possible by September 30th. And I will stop sharing my screen here. And Katie, I'll let you take over to talk to us about what the state of Texas and what Texas citizens are doing through census counts, and what is census counts, Texas counts here in the state. I think we lost Katie. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. She's coming back on. Hey, Katie.
Hi. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So I don't know what you heard, but like we finished through the census timeline. And so we're transitioning over to Texas Counts, and what is Texas Counts, and what has Texas Counts done in the past year?
Okay, well, I think I'm able to share my screen. So if folks will give me 2 seconds, I will get that pulled right up. Okay, apologies, friends. My computer decided it just wanted to shut off, so it took me a second to get back into the webinar, but thanks again for your patience. I'm sure Brucio did a wonderful outline of what the current timeline of the census looks like now. But now I want to switch gears and do a little history lesson for us about Texas Counts and exactly what Texas Counts is. And the way that I'm going to frame telling this story is, as I'm sure many of you, we have all been social distancing, we've been staying at home a lot, and so I have been binge watching a lot of shows. And one of those that I watched was Hamilton, which was one, of course, fabulous, and two, the songs have been stuck in my head. And one in particular is without any spoilers. I'm just going to read exactly what I have on this slide. It goes, who lives, who dies, who tells your story? And that is how I want to tell the story of Texas Counts today, and exactly where we came from, our humble beginnings, and kind of where our story is taking us. So bear with me. I promise there is not going to be any spoilers in my presentation about the musical, but I guess if you've read a history book, you probably have a good idea of what the story of Hamilton is. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's start off with the sad part of our story, who dies? And the short and simple answer to that, which Brucio might have already covered, is House Bill 255. So this was the bill that was proposed during the last legislative session to have a state-sponsored complete count committee. So typically a state, when the census rolls around, they put together a bunch of money, and they also put together an organized effort to make sure that they have a complete count in their state. So for example, the state of California has probably, if not close to $200 million or over $200 million, they have dedicated just specifically to get out the count efforts in their state. So again, you would think Texas is great, we're big too. We would have put money or had an organized effort at the state level to have this complete count effort. Unfortunately, that did not happen. And so House Bill 255 ended up dying in the House. As a result, there was no state-sponsored complete count committee created during that legislative session. In addition, there was also a push to put forward a $50 million budget rider. Again, that did not get passed. And so when we think about in our story, who dies, any type of state-sponsored effort or funding just did not happen for the 2020 census here in Texas. So with that in mind, this is when Texas Counts enters the narrative. And so there was a need for organizing at the statewide level. And so my organization, Every Texan, joined forces with the Communities Foundation of Texas to create to create Texas Counts. And really, ultimately, what our goal was at the beginning of this, over a year ago now, was, hey, both of our organizations have pretty strong networks across the state. I wonder if we could engage leaders who are experts and leaders in their sectors. And if we could get them on board to promote the 2020 census, maybe we can start getting the census message out there. And so again, we started connecting with really diverse leaders from across the state of Texas. Bricio actually serves as the co-chair of our education subcommittee. And when we started bringing all of these leaders together, we eventually formed a steering committee, and then again those sector subcommittees that were folks in the education sector or folks in the business sector from across the state just coming together on calls to, one, get a better understanding about the census, but two, also strategize about how they could really get out the count in their communities. In addition to all of this, we know that outreach costs money. And so in addition to the campaign arm of Texas Counts, we also had a pooled fund that I believe raised 1.4 or $1.5 million in the state of Texas. And again, they were taking this money at the state level, and they were able to disperse it across the state of Texas to some areas that might not necessarily have really robust funding or organization for complete count efforts. So when we started this work, again, we were like, hey, we've got some friends, they're leaders, we think that we can really engage their networks. But as word started spreading about Texas Counts, we started getting all of these questions. And we also started uncovering some really amazing work and some really great partners just across the state that maybe we originally didn't really think that we were going to be engaging with. And so I know, for example, when I came into this position, I really thought I was just going to be kind of coordinating the campaign behind the scenes. What I didn't know is a lot of people just needed education about the census in terms of what's actually on the questionnaire. How do you respond? What's the timeline? What the race and ethnicity question, who do I count in my household? And this education piece started to really come to fruition in terms of, okay, we have this captive audience, people are interested, people want to engage, let's provide them with the resources and materials they need to be able to, one, understand the census, but two, also empower their communities to respond. In addition to that, we were also realizing that there are some really, really amazing people across the state that were already leading really robust get out the count efforts. And so, of course, the Census Bureau we know is operating in our state. They were doing amazing work, but there was also really amazing grassroots leaders, our local elected officials who were really invested in ensuring their communities were counted. So with all of this, Texas Counts starts to evolve a little bit to really meet the needs of the voices we were hearing across the state of Texas. So when we think going back to our metaphor, my very forced metaphor of Hamilton in terms of who lives in the story of the 2020 census here in Texas, it's really those census champions. And so after we got things started and we started really engaging with communities, again, we realized, hey, there's a lot of energy on the ground, there's passion, there's this moment right now where people really want to engage in this work. And so at Texas Counts, we started to adapt to meet those needs. And we really bucketed ourselves into three core areas of work. So one, a partner. Again, we're a partner to the Census Bureau, we're a partner to local complete count efforts happening across the state. We're partnered to different organizations who are operating across Texas as well. We're also a connector. And so whether that be connecting someone to funding or connecting someone to information or resources, or maybe to some peers in their area where they could have lead a localized, robust get out the count effort. And last but not least, we wanted to be a hub for all things census in Texas. So with that in mind, again, there was just a lot of questions around just the census in general. And so we started compiling all of that information on our website and leading informational webinars. At one point in time, I was actually traveling across Texas, leading presentations and just having conversations with folks and providing that resource to them. So again, they would feel confident and empowered to really go out in their communities and make sure folks got counted. But then COVID happens. So we've been doing this work for about a year now. When in January, we were starting to feel pretty good about the work that we were doing. And then come March, we realized that our communities are no longer safe to really be interacting with people in. And as you can imagine, just as everything is during this time, counting during a pandemic is really, really hard. And with that, our census champions had all of these thoughtful strategies and ideas and get out the count strategies to reach their community members where they're at. So that means physically going to the local place of worship after service and setting up a table to have folks respond. That means going to schools. That means going to local community centers, meeting people where they're at, having conversations, being that trusted voice and messenger, and making people feel safe and comfortable to respond to the census. We know in the time of COVID, that's not an option right now, and it's still not an option. And so when the pandemic hit and we started feeling those social distancing restrictions in our state, our census champions who were so engaged and ready to go really started worrying about losing momentum, losing funding for their efforts, but also possibly more importantly, how are they going to keep their community safe during this time as well? And with that, again, Texas Counts and our community partners across the state of Texas really had to do a strong pivot. So again, who lives in this story, despite all of these obstacles that are continuing to try and stop our census champions from getting an accurate count, they continue to persevere and push through. And I want to give you some examples of some things that Texas Counts has been offering folks to really amplify efforts across the state. So when we think about that partnership arm, again, we've really been amplifying get out the count efforts happening across the state. With COVID, we've put everything virtual. And so I haven't gotten the opportunity to visit every county in Texas, but I have gotten the opportunity during this time to virtually visit with folks across the state. And with that, I'm able to really work with them to help amplify their efforts happening on the ground. We've also been doing a lot more partnering, organizing. On Census Day, which was April 1st, we put together a huge April 1st event virtually across the state of Texas, and we had hundreds of folks engaged in that effort. And we've also really had to strengthen our social media campaigns. And in addition to that, our connector piece is the census has been changing so much over the past couple of months. And so with that, every other Monday, we've actually been hosting a census update. And so folks who are passionate and engaged in the census and wanting that most recent information, we offered a time and space for people to come together and learn and ask questions and share their insights. In addition to that, we also are starting to host town hall meetings where people can connect, different types of outreach hours to where if folks are really trying to try a new strategy to target communities, we offer those right now. We have open sector call meetings. I know that I referred to our subcommittee meetings. And again, this is just another place for folks like you in the education space. If you're curious what other education leaders and advocates are doing to promote the 2020 census, we offer that time and space and opportunity for y'all to really connect with others. And then of course, we continue to provide that direct technical assistance. And in terms of the hub, our website is still up and alive. We also have a toolkit. And so sometimes census engagement is as simple as scheduling some tweets on your page or on your Facebook or your Instagram account. And so again, we are always trying to continue to push that message, because we've less than 5 weeks left to make sure Texans are counted. And our self-response rate now is sitting at 59.9%. I have a feeling we might have hit 60% today, but I can't verify that right now. And again, just throughout this time, we've really had to move things digitally. We've had to be virtual. And so we've had to think about how do we organize folks digitally online. We led a series about that to get our grassroots organizers and leaders across the state to really feel comfortable doing that. And then we also have a newsletter, and of course, social media has been our friend during this time. So with all of that, I do know that folks joining us, tuning in today, are probably interested in, okay, there's about 5 weeks left. What can I actually be doing right now? And I want to tell the story of what census champions across Texas have been doing during this time to promote the 2020 census. And so again, there was plans to do a lot of in-person activities, and those have pivoted to being online or over the phone. So census champions have been doing phone and text banking, call and text trees, obviously creating really robust social media presences, virtual events exactly like this one, where folks are tuning in to learn more about the census, and then hopefully they hear that message, and after this, everyone on this webinar is going to contact 10 of their friends or family or community members to ask if they've completed the form. Email blasts, newsletters, just adding something as simple as an email signature during this time of just reminding folks, hey, the census is here. The link is my2020census.gov. Like, let's make sure we're filling this out. In addition to that, people are also doing safe outreach events in communities right now. And so one of the most popular events that has been happening across the state of Texas are Census Caravans. And this is literally where groups of people get in their cars, they decorate them with census posters and materials, and they just go through communities that are undercounted or have low self-response rates, honking their horns, yelling out their windows, alerting their communities like, hey, the census is here. Let's make sure you're responding. This has been a really popular activity. It's been done in urban and in rural spaces. So again, it doesn't have to be the biggest caravan, but if you can get a couple of cars together and go through some of these communities, it could be really beneficial to hear that message coming from a trusted voice. There's been art installations. People have done kind of socially distanced music events at local parks and things like that. In addition, a lot of people have been partnering with essential locations. And so when we think about our grocery stores, our food banks, our diaper banks, gas stations, schools, all of these different essential locations which have been operating at different levels, that's a really good connection point. A really good example of this is that when school was still kind of in session back in April and May, when kiddos were coming to get their school lunches, there was folks putting up census like yard signs at those schools. There was people safely walking with masks on, just talking to parents in those cars. If, hey, have you filled out your census yet? Again, just thinking about ways where people are congregating or where people are going, and incorporating that census messaging in. Of course, there's so much going on in the world right now, but we also know that the census is going to affect our state and our communities for the next 10 years. And so when that person is in line to get food, yes, respect the fact that that person is in line to get food. But if they're waiting, maybe there's an opportunity to have a safe conversation with them about the census. In addition to that, I know that folks have been partnering with restaurants and to-go orders and placing census flyers in there too. Really, however you can creatively think about how to really connect with communities and folks and where they're at is how you're going to get that message across. Another example is, again, safe community events. And something that has been really popular and has actually been working in the Valley recently is that they have been having school supplies giveaways and drives. And so at those events where they're giving kiddos their supplies for the school year, they're also including census messaging, and they also have folks that are safely walking around with masks and iPads, and actually having people respond to the census in real time. So that means like a safe distance away from the car and helping them fill out that questionnaire. So again, we've got 5 weeks left. There's probably not a lot of money out there to do these efforts, but if you can think of some creative, maybe scrappy ways to really promote the 2020 census, every effort really matters and is crucial during this time. And then last but not least, when we think about media, the local media has been pretty good about keeping the census in the news and just thinking about different opportunities. So if you were to do a school supply giveaway, maybe you invite your local news station to come out and cover that piece. So just thinking about, again, ways to really broadcast this message. I think we have a couple of comments in the chat, and Deborah's sharing that NEISD has included census flyers and meal distributions. That is great. We know that kiddos are going to be getting those meals, and by simply putting that flyer in, we know that those flyers are going to get home. And then Alyssa is asking where we can get some census flyers. Great question. And we will, you can find some on the Census Bureau's website, but we also have some at texascounts.org that are a little bit more Texas specific that you can share out. But I also imagine that there's quite a few partners who have some collateral created, but let's follow up. And the last thing I want to cover today is I've given you a lot of examples and ideas, but again, I really want to celebrate who lives in our story of Texas Counts. And again, that is our census champions. So about 2 months ago, we went on a virtual road trip across the state of Texas. So what do I mean by that? I mean that we virtually visited different regions of Texas every day of the week. And on those days of the week, so for example, on Tuesday, June 23rd, we were in South Texas in the Valley. That whole day was dedicated to the one celebrating the Valley in South Texas, but also promoting the 2020 census. So on that day, folks in the Valley were leading virtual events. They were leading safe in-person events. They were trying to get everyone in their communities really promoting the 2020 census. And I want to tell you a little bit more about those stories. So first, let's talk about the numbers. We had a really successful week. We had 5 days of Get Out the Count efforts. We had kickoff events. We had 52 speakers participate. We had over 5,000 people tune into programming across the week. We had over 60 different events happening across the state of Texas, and just lots of folks involved, lots of social media stuff happening too. And now I want to show you the pictures. Again, these were events that were put together with not too much time. Well, some of them a little bit more time, like that gorgeous mural in the right corner. But again, these were just organizations, people who were really excited and passionate about the census, and they wanted to make sure their communities are counted. And so something that was really popular, as you'll see on this flyer and on this one too, is Census Loteria was extremely popular. There's actually Census Loteria cards that you can download, and they were playing virtually throughout the course of the week across the state of Texas. In the right-hand corner, that's just an example of folks from the North Texas area who came together on a kickoff event and were sharing out about the importance of the census. The bottom right corner, if you're in the Houston, Harris County area, these gorgeous census murals have been going up across the city. And again, there's just these beautiful works of art that are promoting the census in a safe way. In addition to that, we also had some really fun and interesting events happening. For example, there's a local musician doing his thing, playing music, being broadcast on Facebook Live, but he's also promoting the 2020 census. We had local DJs and radio stations promoting the census. You are seeing that correctly. That is an Elvis impersonator, and that was another event that they were doing out in West Texas to promote the census. If you're a baseball fan, potentially a Texas Rangers fan like my family is, we actually, the city of Arlington went live from the new stadium, from the new ballpark, and it was really cool because they were literally on the field before the season really got started, just promoting the 2020 census. I think I have one more group of slides. There was giveaways, there was virtual Zumba. Right here in the middle is an example of one of those Census Caravans that was going through communities. In Port Arthur, they were wrapping buses. I really like this one in the right-hand corner because it's showing someone, as you can see, with that computer actually helping someone fill out the census questionnaire in real time. Again, it doesn't have to be the most elaborate, thoughtful engagement or effort, as long as you're getting into the community virtually or safely in person and reminding our communities to respond to the 2020 census. Again, any effort really will make a difference. So with that, this is kind of my call to action for everyone joining us today. In this theme of Hamilton, we know that Texans were already set up against some really hard barriers, and when we didn't have that complete count committee at the start of this, the state-sponsored complete count effort. And then when we move along, we know that COVID has really affected our communities in so many different ways, including getting an accurate count in our state. And so with these last 5-ish weeks remaining, I really invite everyone on this call to join the narrative of the 2020 census in Texas. Be a census champion. Join the story as someone who really, again, make sure that your community is counted and gets the resources and funding and representation that you need for the next 10 years. And so I challenge everyone today to connect with 10 people. Call people on the phone, send them a text message, send out an email blast. Just say, hey, have you completed the 2020 census yet? Here's the link. What questions do you have? I'm happy to answer them or send you in the right direction. And really, it's these local connections, these small outreach efforts that are really going to have that impact at the end of the day of getting everyone in our state counted. And with that, I do want to share some resources if you are like, oh my gosh, I'm fired up. I want to get engaged in these last 5 weeks. I want to help folks finish strong. Again, join the narrative. This coming Monday at 12 p.m. Central, we host a live census update. So we go through the operations, where we're at. We talk about the self-response rates in Texas, and we also talk about the best get out the count practices happening across the state. In addition to that, we also have a town hall, and I'm happy to follow up with Bricio and send the links to these events if you're curious in joining. Our next one is going to be about representation, more specifically for our communities, our immigrant communities, our undocumented communities, and why it is so important for them to respond to the census and be counted in this country. Because yes, regardless of citizenship status, if you're in the United States, you count on the 2020 census. And then last but not least, which is kind of an easy way to do outreach, is every Friday starting next Friday, we'll be doing an outreach hour. We're specifically focusing on a different type of get out the count strategy. So I believe next week is texting and text banking. And so we'll kind of give you the language and the know-how of how to really engage with people. And then that hour is reserved for you to be able to kind of practice what we're teaching you all how to do. So it's an interactive opportunity to really start engaging in this work. And we do have a newsletter that goes out. And then if you follow our handles on social media, which I did not include, but it's just Texas Counts. Again, we have the latest information. We have really fun graphics. If you are interested in starting to post things on your channels, I've also, I'll put this slide deck in the chat box when I'm finished. But if you click right here, we just have a lot of fun graphics that we update weekly. So if you're thinking of wanting to promote the 2020 census, we got you. We got graphics for you. And then our website is there as well. And then if you need anything, my email is right there. And I think that is all that I have. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was awesome. I love that presentation. So we still have a few minutes left. I'm gonna pause right here. I know that we have questions, and I know that there are also comments. And so I'm gonna pause right here and before moving forward and give you all a chance to ask any questions over what we've gone over so far, or if you have comments or ideas, you can go ahead and share those right now.
I'd like to ask something. I did post this question in the chat, and I'm really educating myself about the census. I was working for the census, so I was going around and interviewing people, and so I would like to know exactly who is ultimately making the decisions about how the census happens, because I spent a lot of time trying to find addresses that had been apartment buildings, houses that had been demolished and replaced with industrial terminals. And I spent a lot of time going around complexes, condominium complexes, where the majority of the people don't even live there. And I did report this to the manager, my supervisor and her manager. And so he did things a little bit differently for a while, but it's such a waste of time and money, you know, to be going around to where people are telling you, I'm only here for 2 days, you know, I don't want to be bothered. And then you're supposed to find a proxy who knows nothing more than that person knew. And so what I finally did then was I got a list of which voters actually lived in the complex, and that helped. But I'm just wondering at what level that changes, because or can change. Because what strikes me is, as I put in my question, Corpus lost a seat in the last census. For 10 years, they haven't had that seat, you know? And that just seems like such a long time to be not represented, basically. And so I'm thinking 10 years is too long. Too many changes are happening. And there should be something like, for instance, when properties change hands, there should be something that automatically goes to the census that says, you know, this is no longer owned by this person, it's now owned by this company. Just, you know, to save time in the long run. Anyway, those are just my views. Right now, I'm actually going to be registering voters. And so that's why I'm interested in having these flyers, because I can be passing those out at the same time.
That's a really good question, and I think it's an important question, right? And so I guess I'll start by addressing the, you know, who is in charge of making sure that census happens every 10 years, right? I mean, I think the fundamental reason we have the census is because it is a constitutional mandate. The U.S. Constitution specifies that it should occur every 10 years. So that there is no flexibility around that unless there's an amendment to change that, right? The other thing that I would say is that human populations are dynamic, and the communities in which we live in are dynamic and change and mold, you know, throughout time. And so in terms of apartment complexes getting demolished and being replaced by industrial sites or vice versa, right? That's a sort of challenge that census enumerators have to deal with today, but they've had to deal with it over the course of the entire sort of history of the census. The other thing that I would address is that counting every single human being in one of the largest nations in the world is a monumental undertaking. And it is impossible to be sort of connected and aware of every possible challenge that could happen in any given year. And so to talk a little bit about how that's being addressed, I think there's a huge step that was changed and addressed this decennial year, and that's the addition of being able to respond to the census online, right? That came with its own challenges, right? Obviously, not everybody in the country has the same access to internet and devices that would allow them to do that, right? But I think it's a huge step forward in trying to accommodate or adjust to the changing dynamics of how people live in the United States. Katie, do you have anything to add to that? I think these are very good questions, and they're important questions to ask.
I think the only thing that I will add, and I cannot speak on behalf of the Census Bureau, but I do know that the Census Bureau doesn't rest in terms of kind of their operations of getting things up and running. What exactly that looks like behind the scenes, I'm not 100% sure, but you sharing reports of going to a location that is no longer there, you're not the only person I've ever heard that from. And is that an issue? Yes. I don't know what the solution is, how to make that better. I've also known of some areas that haven't received. I'm in Austin, so you can imagine things are being built all the time. And sometimes people aren't even receiving invitations to respond to the census because their new development or wherever they're living just isn't recorded yet. And so again, I think that's why this work is so important, because as trusted messengers in so many different sectors and fields, and we're on the news maybe, or on the radio talking about the census, and then we're in our kiddos take-home folder, there's a flyer in there talking about the census, and then maybe someone is tuning in on or scrolling through Facebook and they see an ad. It's all these different connection points that are hopefully going to really motivate someone to respond to the census. And so I agree with you, the operations are not perfect, and I do wish they could be better, and I do wish that there was an easier way to get an accurate count. But again, this is kind of unfortunately where we're at right now. And so I am very excited to hear that, one, you're registering people to vote, but two, you're also looking at this as an opportunity to include kind of census outreach materials too, to have these folks being seen and represented and heard in two different ways, which I think is really great. So thank you for doing that work. And I have heard some, I won't say horror stories, but I have heard some really big difficulties that enumerators have been experiencing. And so I hear that, and I'm glad that you were able to report that. And I share that sentiment that I wish it could run a little bit smoother.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Katie, now that you mentioned that the census works year round, right? This is a question that often some of my friends have, is like, well, what does the Census Bureau do over the course of 10 years? Over the course of those 10 years, they're testing different census questions. They're also sort of one of the main agencies or departments within the US government that also submits other types of surveys throughout the year. So one of the most important surveys for us to understand communities is the American Community Survey, and that's done year round. So the census is a complete enumeration, a complete count of every person living in the United States every 10 years. So that's an actual count of everybody. In between, the Census Bureau is actually taking surveys, samples of the population to try to estimate changes in communities down to the census block group level. So if you think about a block in your neighborhood, and then you think about a collection of maybe 5 or 8 blocks, the census will actually survey the entire country every year to try to estimate the number of people living in that group of blocks, and then aggregates that so we can understand how the population is changing between census years. Oddly enough, those estimates, the construction of those estimates statistically depend on the enumeration of the previous census. And so that's one way that we can understand whether apartment buildings are demolished, whether new developments are rising sort of in the suburbs. But because our country is so large and complicated and our populations are dynamic, it is impossible to account for every single change that happens in between years. The other thing I would mention is that over the course of these past 3 years, I think there's been a lot of cynicism attached to the Census Bureau, starting with the citizenship question, which, by the way, was not necessarily the idea of the Census Bureau. It came from the Department of Commerce, in which the Census Bureau is housed under, right? And I would counter that and say the Census Bureau is actually diligent and wants to get a complete and accurate count. That is their entire sort of mode of, that's the reason they exist, right? And so I think it's important to sort of think of the Census Bureau as an ally in this effort, right? Their whole purpose is to get an accurate and complete count, just like ours. And so that's the only thing I would say about that. And in terms of representation, I think that is a concern, right? In this decennial year, the state of Texas was poised, right, based on our population estimates, how we've grown, we're set to gain 3 additional seats. Now, because of undercounts and because of state not funding census operations directly, that could be compromised. But that's why we have 1 entire month, right, to get this sort of large surge or push to get as many people counted. Thank you so much, Eliza, for that question, for your comments.
Well, thank you all both for your answer. It's very clarifying. Did you mention American Community Survey? Was
yes.
that what you said? Okay.
The ACS is one of the many products, the data products that the Census Bureau develops, tests, and disseminates for us to understand communities.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Other questions or comments before moving on to the next part of the presentation, which I'll go through quite quickly. So I have some other images to show. We had invited somebody from the census to present with us today, but she was unable to make it. But she did provide some images and examples of some of the things that are happening in the Rio Grande Valley. And so the Rio Grande Valley is one of those places that has been, that is sort of, is trying to get as much of the population count as possible. And Katie, I will actually address one of the things that you said earlier today. If we look at the census response rates nationally, the US as a whole has counted, and these are self-response rates, these does not count those enumerators that have actually gone out, which is called non-response follow-up, NARFU. So as of today, as of the 26th, the 64.6% of all U.S. households have responded to the census. However, in Texas, I will be happy to report that we have reached a 60% response rate. And so that is a huge win. We were at 64% the same time last year, last census. So we are making progress in terms of getting a complete and accurate count. If you're interested in looking at this map, I'm gonna put the link for it in the chat box. This is the census response rate tracker. And it shows you how each state is responding to the census. This is a great tool for your specific community because you can actually drill down to the census tract, which is a very small level of geography. It actually shows you how your community is doing in terms of census response rates. If we look at the state of Texas response rates, overall, it's 60%. And you can see how sort of the metro areas are the ones with the higher response rates. And the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley, which is down along the Texas-Mexico border, is below the census response rates. They are around the 40%, right, depending on which county you're looking at. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in these next series of images. So the Census Bureau, as I said, is, again, making the best out of sort of the challenges that have been handed to us in getting a complete count because of COVID. So this is an image from the Toros Stadium, which is down in the Rio Grande Valley. I mentioned earlier NARFU, the non-response follow-up, in which census enumerators are actually going out to communities and knocking on doors to get counted all households that have not submitted their census form. And so this is a mass orientation onboarding of census enumerators that happened down in the valley. They started NARFU in mid-August, I believe August 11th. And this is one of the mass orientations that they had at the Toros soccer stadium. So here's another image of how the census is making a huge effort to try to get as many people counted in the amount of time that we have. So some other images, this is a barbecue that was hosted down the valley as well. A group of folks actually created a Census Scholarship for students and raised money for the scholarship by selling plates and having this barbecue. So that's one way that we can sort of get people to know about the census, to get them to fill out the census. Here's another image of the Census Caravans that Katie was mentioning earlier today. This has been, something that has kind of become a sort of marker of the pandemic. People are doing these for birthdays. We had something similar to this for our boss earlier this week on Monday. It was her birthday, our president and CEO. And so we organized a modified caravan. We actually got out and social distance. Everybody was wearing a mask, and we sang happy birthday to her on her lawn, along with mariachis. And so we, the census sort of champions have actually taken this thing that emerged out of sort of the need to celebrate people and their birthdays and sort of modified it into a way to raise awareness for the census. I think this is a great idea, and I first learned about it from Katie. Census parades. This is a group of folks that are disseminating meals at school. And they took that opportunity to also disseminate census materials. So they know that people are going to be coming by and getting meals for their kids. And in doing so, they said, hey, this is a great opportunity to expose people to the census and how to fill out the census and how to get people involved. Census concerts are another reason. So there's a number of different ways that we can sort of push forward in this last surge. Robocalls and text messages are another way that school districts, I think, are empowered to let people know about the census. There's also school meal distributions, like the image you just saw. And you can also contact your regional census representatives. So they are always able to help with strategizing or with ideas. If you have an idea of how to get people out to an event in a way that's safe and they can social distance, they'll be able to help as well. And then, of course, making promotional video contests. And so this is super easy. You can do it with your phone and then upload it to YouTube. The city of El Paso actually made one quite some time ago, actually, sometime last year, as a way to promote the census, the upcoming census. I think I should also cap this off by saying that we understand that schools, school districts, communities, educators are in a pretty challenging time right now. You are dealing with sort of adjusting how you would normally teach students and deliver instructional delivery. And so we understand that adding sort of another task, focusing on the census, is not ideal, right? But what we are saying is that there are sort of easy ways that you can just insert a message into your day-to-day activities. Like, Katie said, call 10 people and let them know, have you filled out the census? Do you know how to do it? And so again, just to reiterate, you can respond online, through the phone, or through the mail. I will stop right there and stop sharing. Here's my email and Katie's email. And I will open it up to any other questions or comments. We're about 1 minute from wrapping up. Let's see. Okay, cool. Well, if that's if there are no questions, I want to thank everybody for being here. Please spread the word. Please contact me if you have any questions or if you have ideas. We are willing to work with you and help out in any way that we can. And I want to give a big shout out to Katie Martin Lightfoot for being on this call with us today. If there are no more questions, then
Excuse
yes.
me, Patricio, could you just flash your email again?
I will put it on the chat box, and then you can cut and paste it.
Thank you.
There you go. Okay, well, once again, thank you all so much for being here. Spread the word. Let me know if you have any questions. Reach out to me for help or ideas. I'll be happy to thought partner with you on how we can sort of push in this last month to get as many people counted as possible. Thank you all so much.